The CSPS Hall, its Czech-Slovak Fraternal Organizations, St. Paul, Minnesota, for the CGSI Symposium, October 24th, 2020. Some disclaimers. Since I do not pronounce Czech, I will only read the English equivalents. The national and St. Paul Czech-Slovak community often referred to itself as Bohemian. Documentation, citations exist in my previous publications found at my website, given later. A major project has taken over the third floor of the CSPS Hall to organize and research the archives, thanks to Pat Slaver, Andrea Manilov, and Joan Sedlacek. The collection includes over 160 years of ledgers, photographs, and images. This presentation is based upon 6 community historical publications I researched and published, based in part upon my roles as president of Sokol, of the president of the West 7th Business Association, and as community activist for the Fort Road West 7th Federation, District 9 Community Council. The timeline for non-native settlement. Fort Road West 7th Street, the Township and City of St. Paul, the Territory, State of Minnesota, and Czech-Slovak neighborhoods. In 1840s, French Canadians out of Fort Snelling settled first at Fountain Cave along the Mississippi River and then at the Upper Levee. In 1849, Minnesota was named a territory with the town of St. Paul as its capital. In the 1850s, entrepreneurs from New England and German immigrants settled the Upper Levee and the Seven Corners neighborhood above it. In the 1860s, the first Czech-Slovak families began to settle west of and next to the German settlement along the Mississippi River and along Fort Road, or West 7th Street. And you'll see on the map that there's the downtown in the upper right-hand corner, and Seven Corners, which was its major intersection of the time, then the German neighborhood, then the Bohemian neighborhood, and at its center were the CSPS Hall and St. Stanislaus Church, the Czech church. And then below that you see the Upper Levee and flats. In September 8, 1860, Michael Kartak and family joined 6 Czech families living in the Upper Levee. On the Mississippi River, the lower landing became the commercial furthest north port of the river, particularly through the efforts of J.J. Hill's railroad empire. The upper landing became the de facto Ellis Island and immigrant debarkation port. Its flats provided ready land for immigrant shacks. The Mississippi River became an immigrant highway. The city of St. Louis at its center. The overland route came via Wisconsin. And you see in the image the flats back in the 1860s. In 1868, Slavonic Linden Tree, a literary society, was organized by Czech-Slovak immigrants in St. Paul. At the same time, a workers' union was formed. Here you see the records, library loan records of 1879 of Slovanská Lipa. In July of 1881, Slovanská Lipa was absorbed by CSPS Lodge number 12. This at left is the official document that goes on for several pages with clauses, etc., handwritten, and this is the actual discovered document. On March 4th of 1854, the Czech-Slovak Protection Society originally translated as the Bohemian Slovenian Benevolent Society, was founded in St. Louis at Joseph Model's Tavern to provide health insurance and funeral expenses, perhaps as the oldest fraternal lodge in the United States. In 1849, there was a cholera epidemic in St. Louis that killed 4,500 of a population of 60,000. And in 1855, 5.5% of Chicago's population. Cholera was spreading throughout the Mississippi River system. Fraternal societies arose in response to the epidemics. The mutual support in times of sickness, as social and cultural organizations. They paralleled German organizations in St. Louis, particularly the 1845 German Benevolent Association. They were liberal, progressive, anti-sectarian, free-thinking, and alternative to Catholic organizations. CSA lodges in America represented typical characteristics of a fraternal benefit society. They had a true lodge structure, a formal ritualistic form of conducting its meetings, a representative form of governance, and provisions for the payment of death and sickness benefits. In April 19, 1901, the Minnesota State Act of Legislature provided for the incorporation of grand and subordinate lodges, specifically for the Ancient Order of United Workmen and the CSPS and related lodges. In 1876, 116 members organized Lodge Number 12 of St. Paul, the first of 6 lodges organized in Minnesota. On April 13, 1878, the Grand Lodge of Minnesota was established, of 10 in the United States, under the National Supreme Lodge in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1880, St. Paul City Directory listed 257 Bohemian family names. 241 were residents of the West 7th neighborhood, with the CSPS Hall at its center. The 1880 census, there were 267,000 foreign-born Minnesota residents. 7,750 had Czech names. However, the Austrian population was larger and no doubt included Czechs. In the 1870s and 80s, CSPS expansion reflected growth of American fraternalism for many secular and religious organizations. Between 1879 and 1890, 54 new fraternal organizations were organized in the United States. The CSPS as a fraternal organization, it became basically the financial arm of the secular Czech Slovak community beyond its benevolent functions. In 1879, they relocated a schoolhouse as their first hall at 383 Michigan Street, but it was destroyed by fire in 1886. In 1887 through 90, a second 2-story hall was completed as a cultural center. Emil Ulrichi, architect, William Grunwald, contractor, prominent Germans of St. Paul. The first floor served as commercial space as it does to this day. The second floor had a stage and activity hall with a private meeting space. The sketch that you see includes the 2-story hall with the first and second St. Stanislaus churches, which I'll refer to later. Václav Pika, Old Pika. He was a founding member of the CSPS in Sokol, a tavern owner on the first floor hall for 25 years. He was an educator, at the Czech Free School, the Saturday school for the Czech community, and diarist documenting the first decades of the St. Paul Bohemian community. Here you see a picture of him with an unidentified woman, still to be discovered, at the Czech Free School. The 1900 photo shows the CSPS founders in the original second-story meeting room. And there you see the president's chair. In 1917, a third floor, offices, and private meeting space was added. Those custom-made furnishings are still preserved and were original to those. And you can see the images on the left with the official chairs of the president and leadership of the CSPS. And on the right, you see the pictures of the different founding organizations, including CSPS. In 1932, CSPS merged with several groups to form CSA Fraternal Life, the Czechoslovak Society of America in New York, as America's oldest fraternal society. The ribbon on the right was worn by members in the early days, and when a member deceased, the ribbon was flipped over and turned to black. The CSPS Hall was erected post-World War II, and you can see it refers to Czechoslovak American. In June of 1896, there was the 40th anniversary of the CSPS nationally. 24 states sent delegates to St. Paul for its national convention of the Bohemian Slavonic Benevolent Association. 13 Minnesota lodges numbered 363 members with one vote. Nationally, there were 10,944 CSPS members. This image reflects the official document. It is just a part of it that we discovered in the archives. Antonin Jurka was a prominent St. Paul journalist who went on to become an educator and had a unique approach to his teaching that incorporated gymnastics, singing, good discipline, and harmonious spirit, taken from his experience with Sokols. He was a founding CSPS and Sokol member, and he gave the historic keynote at the 1896 CSPS National Convention in St. Paul. In 1899, he became National CSPS Secretary in New York. An interesting piece of this is that his daughter, Blanche Jurka, became a famous stage and screen actress. And her book on the enjoyment of theater was used in theater departments in higher education up until current times. In 1907, St. Paul's Lodge, Star of the West, number 45, was organized as part of the Sisterly Benevolent Order of Lodges. It was organized in Cedar Rapids in 1892. The lodges aided immigrants and ill people, decorated graves of deceased members on Memorial Day, and taught handwork to girls, and sent money to Bohemia during droughts or floods. In 1870, the Bohemian Ladies' Unity, a fraternal insurance organization, was founded in Cleveland, Ohio, and met the insurance and social needs of Czech women who were excluded from membership in the CSPS. The organization was patterned after the CSPS philosophically supportive of three thinkers. In 1911, St. Paul's JCD unit of Czech women, number 12, was organized. In 1918, the JCD had 144 lodges nationally and 23,000 members. In 1948, the JCD merged with the CSA. In 1897, there was a schism within CSPS, and that formed the Western Bohemian Fraternal Association, or ZCBJ. It was formed out of Prague, Oklahoma, and Omaha, Nebraska. And it resisted benefits to older or Eastern CSPS membership. Full membership to women as well as non-Czech spouses was granted, and it became more family-centric but maintained the free thought tradition. In September 1898, St. Paul's ZCBJ Lodge, or L, number 69, was organized. This is a quote taken from its formation that beautifully reflects the patterns, shall we say, of the organization. To unite its members fraternally and to furnish them with an opportunity for mutual education and advancement, and to furnish opportunity for relief and aid in the event of their sickness, disability, or distress, to arrange educational lectures and debates, to support Czech American understandings, especially schools and Sokol organizations, to establish, maintain Czech libraries, and to cultivate the mother tongue and culture in general among its members. In 1923, English-speaking lodges were organized nationally, and this is a theme for the Czech, Slovak fraternal organizations. And the records, the ledgers at the CSPS Hall are all in Czech until right about this time, so that transcended the different organizations. In 1927, in St. Paul, there was the 8th National Convention and Reorganization. In 1947, the ZCBJ membership was open to all, regardless of national origin. In 1971, the corporate name was changed to the Western Fraternal Life Association, and in February of this year, the Western Fraternal Life consolidated with mutual benefit. In July 23, 1891, the association Slav Lodge number 3 of the Czech-Slavonian Workmen Benevolent Association was organized largely in Minnesota. In 1929, it merged with the ZCBJ. On November 15, 1889, Lodge Melnik 161 of the CSPS was organized. However, it dissolved in 1916. Now, these images are all huge portraits in the hall that line the official meeting room. Father Jan Rinda was pastor of St. Stanislaus Church, 1886 to 1916. It is interesting that the Polish immigrants preceded the Czech and were largely responsible for the building of St. Stanislaus Catholic Church. However, they were soon overwhelmed by the numbers of Czech immigrants And when Father Rinda became their pastor, the Poles left to form another church in St. Paul. In 1891, St. Joseph's Society, New Prague, and the Catholic Czech American Workmen, St. Paul, incorporated in Minnesota as the Catholic Workmen at St. Stan's. The purposes of the organization were to provide the moral, spiritual, and social and education and advancement of its members, the payment of death benefits of deceased members. Branches were added in 16 states. November 2nd, 1902, the St. Stanislaus Church Hall, Katolika Beseda, opened across the street from the CSPS. It was built of pressed brick. It was 50 feet wide, 120 feet long, with a central heating, with library and reading room. Central heating at that time was very unique. The stage was 20 feet by 22 feet. The auditorium seated 700. The basement contained a gymnasium, club room, bowling alley, billiard tables, gymnasium apparatus, shower baths, and other conveniences. You can see on the map where the CSPS hall is located. Across the alley, you have the church, and across the street, the church hall. Now, this reflected the division, shall we say, within the Czech Slovak community between Catholics and free thinkers. Father Rinda would often lecture his parishioners after church not to stop at Vaclav Pika's tavern on the way home from church, which was interesting because Rinda and Pika were good friends, and Pika would often, or rather Rinda would often go over to the tavern in off hours and share a beer with Vaclav. In 2004, the first Catholic Slovak Ladies Association acquired assets of the Catholic Workmen. Czech and Slovak Sokol, Minnesota is the secular, non-benefit fraternal. In 1865, the first American Sokol unit was organized, once again in St. Louis, Missouri. On June 13, 1882, St. Paul's unit was organized by 10 men as a programmatic arm of the secular Czech-Slovak community. They sponsored physical education classes and even joint outings with the Germanic Turner Society. In 1885, Sokol and St. Paul adopted the name Sokol Zita, though it was inactive in the 1890s. In 1900, they reformed for physical training, singing, and theater programs to spread the Sokol idea to neighboring states and Minnesota towns. In 1908, the first Sokol women's gymnastics classes were held. Joseph Wallow was the first Sokol men's gymnastic director. His daughter Bessie was the first women's gymnastic director. Bessie's daughter, Georgiana Buzicki Doleschi, became women's and children's physical director. Georgiana organized fundraising, traditional and ethnic dinners and festivals, participated at St. Paul's first Festival of Nations and the International Slet in Prague, and even in 1938, just before the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia. She organized the senior singers and compiled a songbook of folk tunes in Czech and Slovak languages. That family several generations of Sokol that only recently came to end. In 1915, the first St. Paul Sokol Slet, or gymnastics competition and public exhibition, was held at Harriet Island. In 1926, the District of Minnesota Sokols built a camp in Pine City, Minnesota. In the 1930s, Wally Strovanek on the accordion, the children in their native kroy or costumes, Czech Slovak costumes, entertained at the Masonic Hospital. In 1978, the St. Paul Sokol Gymnastic Society purchased the hall from the CSPS. Sokol changed its name to Czech and Slovak Sokol, Minnesota, following the dissolution of other Minnesota Sokol units. Community theater. There are hundreds of ledger books, scripts, and programs in Czech that date back to 1860. Of 225 plays published between 1880 and 1930, 65 of the programs that are at the hall detailed the playwright, cast, director, and advertised a dance afterwards. Many scripts are comedies about village life in Bohemia prior to 1900. This is a picture of the original script of a play, Prague is Prague, published in Prague in 1896. In 1917, Victor Hubel painted scenery and backdrops for the CSPS Hall's theater. The front proscenium depicts Prague, and 5 others have settings, Moravian settings, that include street scenes, landscapes, woodlands, rustic interiors, and fancy interiors. The CSPS Hall is a cultural institution. Throughout its history, the hall has housed Czech and Slovak fraternal lodges, singing and theatrical societies, and cultural organizations, civic in nature, associated with religious liberalism and/or free thought, independent of religious affiliation. These included the Czech Free School, as mentioned before, the current Czech and Slovak School of the Twin Cities, a drama club, senior singers, Czech and St. Paul, Czech and Slovak folk dancers, a children's folk dance unit, the Czech and Slovak Cultural Center of Minnesota, and the Honorary Consulate of the Czech Republic. This concludes a review of the fraternal organizations found at the CSPS Hall.